wasn't really sure what I was doing. I wasn't even really sure why I was doing it. I was unconsciously incompetent. Now, I want to take you back in time to when we were all babies. In those first few weeks and months on this planet, we don't know what walking is. We've never acknowledged that people walk. We are unconsciously incompetent. And that's the first stage of learning. And then after a few more weeks and months, we suddenly realize, oh, people walk. And then we realize that we can't walk. And that can be quite frustrating. But we become consciously incompetent at walking. And after some falling over and getting back up again, and then falling over and getting back up again, we suddenly learn how to walk. We become consciously competent, but we have to think about it. And you can see in those first few attempts at walking, when a child's clinging on to a table, they look at you as if to say, I'm going to walk now. And so they do. A little bit at first. They walk from one table to the next. And after some more time, we just, walk. We even do other things while we're walking. We become unconsciously competent at walking. Now, unfortunately, when I was 22 years old, I was a newly qualified teacher. I had my first ever teaching job. And in those first few weeks and months, I was unconsciously incompetent as a teacher. And there's no worse place to be than not knowing what you don't know. In fact, what I've come to realize now, many years on, reflecting on those first few weeks and months, I was completely winging the whole thing. Completely making it up. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't a terrible teacher. I worked really, really hard. I had great relationships with staff members, great relationships with the students. I was meeting all my deadlines, I was planning, I was teaching to the best of my ability. I was trying really, really hard. But I was not really having the impact that I wanted to. And then I slowly started to realize that there were teachers in other classrooms that were doing a better job than I was. I suddenly became consciously incompetent. And that's the worst place to be. The sudden realization that you're not doing the best job you can and that there's other people doing a better job than you are. Now, I went to university and I studied 4 years as a teacher. But university didn't really necessarily inspire me or prepare me for actually being a teacher. I had developed routines and set expectations in other people's classrooms. Nothing had prepared me to do that in my own. And I found university also a little bit contradictory. I had a great time and I did learn a lot about education, but in terms of actually teaching, I found it a bit of a contradictory process because we'd all turn up to lectures and we would sit down and the lecturer would talk to us about how to be a creative teacher and how to personalize the learning for every single child in that class to really inspire the individual. And they would do that through the medium of a 2-hour PowerPoint presentation to all 250 teachers in that lecture theatre. So I came out of university with kind of knowledge on education, but not really prepared to be a teacher. Except here I was at 22 years old, in my first school, in front of 38-year-olds being consciously incompetent. Now, I was very lucky because I had a primary leadership team that supported me greatly, and they introduced me to the idea of marginal gains. This is Sir Dave Brailsford, and he is the former head of the British cycling team. And he talked about the idea of marginal gains. He led the British cycling team to Olympic medals, Olympic gold medals, World Championship glory. What he talked about was that he took cycling and he split it into lots of little bits. And he would improve each little bit by 1%. And by the time you've improved all these different parts by 1%, the actual impact would be far greater. So he would tweak the wheels on the bikes. He would make the bike slightly lighter by shaving parts off the bike. He would tweak the diets and the training programs for the athletes. And he even went as far as making sure that each athlete slept on a consistent pillow every single night. And sure enough, over time, he led the British cycling team to Olympic and World Championship glory. Now, my leadership team believed that to be the same in teaching, because teaching and learning can be extremely complicated. And what I've come to realize now is that most teachers at some point in those early years of being a teacher, in fact, most teachers throughout their career at some point will feel consciously incompetent. But if you take teaching and learning, which is quite a big concept, and break it down into tiny little bits and improve each one step at a time, then over a period of improvement, you'll improve your teaching practice quite dramatically. And so that's what I decided to do. I worked with my leadership team. I took small aspects of my teaching, made them better, and then moved on to the next one. I would look at how to get the children to stand up and line up in a straight line, ready for assembly. I would then think about how I got the children back from playtime into the classroom, calmly ready to learn. I would think about how I asked questions in the classroom to engage the students in a more effective way. And sure enough, I started to feel like I was making a bit of progress. Now, at the same time, I decided to write a blog about it. I decided to write my kind of journey as a teacher and the things that I was trialing and the things that I felt were working. I also discovered things like Twitter, YouTube, and other social media websites where I found that there were other teachers like me who were trialing small things and sharing these small, tiny tips, these marginal gains with the world. And so I would take their ideas and apply it to my classroom, and I would share my ideas on social media and through my blogs that I was writing. And again, slowly, I felt like I was getting somewhere. Now, it wasn't until maybe 10 years later that everything that I was doing started to make a bit more sense. I bumped into a person who was actually a fan of my blog. And they said, I really think your blog's brilliant. It's a really great example of micro-learning. I had no idea what he was talking about. I had no idea what micro-learning was. So I did what any teacher does when somebody comes to you and says something that you don't understand. You smile, you nod, you pretend you know exactly what they're talking about, and then you go straight home and Google it. And so that's what I did. I Googled micro-learning. Micro-learning is the idea. It's a skills learning focused approach. And what it is, it takes a skill and breaks it down into small chunks, and you just learn those for maybe 10 to 20 minutes a day. And sure enough, one piece of micro-learning feels quite small, but over time, it gets much bigger. And the skill that you're working on gets better. And that's what I found with my teaching. I was slowly starting to make progress. In fact, there was even some moments when I started to feel like I was becoming consciously competent at certain aspects of my teaching. And what I've kind of come to realize now is that teaching at its basic level is relatively straightforward. All we really need to do as teachers is help students get better at stuff. And the best way to get better at stuff is to break that stuff down into smaller little bits of stuff and feed it slowly to the students over a period of time. Make it more digestible. But for some reason, teaching as a general practice has been overcomplicated. It's been made really difficult or feel really difficult and overwhelming. And we also have overcomplicated the idea of getting better at teaching. Because if we really are just taking the idea of getting better at stuff and breaking it down to make it easier to get better at stuff, then that's really what we need to start doing with teaching. We overcomplicate getting better at teaching stuff. One piece of research that I've been engaging with quite recently is the science of learning. And the science of learning cuts away all the other things to do with education and just focuses on the brain and how the brain learns best. And many teachers are adopting neuroscience research that's been converted into digestible aspects of teaching and applying those digestible aspects of teaching into the classroom. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in the spirit of microlearning, I thought I would introduce you to my 7 research-informed tips for how to take the science of learning and apply it into the classroom. Tip number 1, students will probably remember the first 10 to 20 minutes of a lesson the most. And tip number 2, students need to ensure that they're being provided with opportunities for retrieval practice and practical learning in order to take that learning and embed it into their long-term memory. Tip number 3, students must ensure that they understand that effort, choice and ownership of their learning matter the most. Tip number 4, students need to be provided with frequent, low-stakes, stress-free formative assessments in order to track the learning process. Tip number 5, students need to be reflective. Tip number 6, well-being, diet, nutrition, exercise, sleep, all play a significant factor in the learning process. Now, the science of learning, tip number 7. Tip number 7, the students need to know the previous 6 rules. And the science of learning has got me thinking, because this research is all about how students learn best, except it's not. It's how brains learn best, and teachers have brains too. So we can also apply these rules to teachers and professional development. So, in the spirit of microlearning, I'm going to reintroduce you to these rules, but by replacing student with teacher and professional development. Tip number 1, teachers will probably remember the first 10 to 20 minutes of a professional development session the most. Tip number 2, teachers need opportunities for retrieval practice and practical learning in order to take that professional development and embed it in their long-term memory. They need to give things a go. Tip number 3, teachers must remember that effort, choice and ownership of their professional development matter the most. Tip number 4, teachers need to be provided with frequent, low-stakes, stress-free observations or assessments in order to help track their progress, not necessarily stressful formal lesson observations. Tip number 5, teachers need to be reflective. Tip number 6, teachers need well-being and exercise and nutrition and diet and sleep all play a significant factor in a teacher's performance. And tip number 7, teachers benefit from knowing these rules. When I first started as a teacher, I was unconsciously incompetent. And then quite quickly I realized I wasn't doing a very good job. I became consciously incompetent. But through giving things a go, looking after myself, assessing and reviewing and being reflective quite frequently, including by writing my blogs and reflecting on what I was doing in the classroom, by taking that micro-learning and focusing on marginal gains, I felt like I was getting better. In fact, as I said, I was slowly becoming consciously competent. And in fact, there were even aspects of my teaching where they were starting to become habits. I was slowly, and certain aspects of my teaching were becoming unconsciously competent. Or as I like to talk about, teaching a little bit like a ninja. Now, at first I wasn't really sure what I was doing, and I applied, and accidentally so, I was applying the science of learning and micro-learning and marginal gains to my own professional development. I just didn't know that that was what I was doing when I started.